Раз, два, три.
Поехали, мужики, поехали, давай!
Дымить надо идти.
Степаныч,
197 минут.
ну, блядь,
Еще
комендант
осталось,
наш. Говорю, дай, говорю, еще пару автоматов, блядь. Нам тут охранять надо, блядь. Ну, прикинь, хули вы приехали, блядь.
Нам надо ж высказать.
Потом скажем.
Когда потом? Смотрите. Переводчика нет. Заходите, а переводчик где? Вот тут мы живем. Вот здесь вон еще. Так, все.
Вот сюда бы ему на инаугурацию, мы бы ему все перечислим и полпенсии на восстановление садиков, школы, лишь бы...
Давайте платите, коммунальные тоже требуют, давайте платить. С чего мы наплатим?
Мы хотим мира, мы не хотим войны, мы молимся, поможите нам, помогите, пожалуйста.
Кто-то рядом, побойтесь Бога. Хватит уже. Хватит, у нас башка.
А мы не знаем, что
Так,
там
не
наша
балуйте,
власть
Саша, не балуйте.
А то мы не знаем, что у нас тут в городе, у наших закоулках находится.
Италия или...
Миша, ты на смену не пробивался. Планируй. Готовы? Да. Огонь! Огонь! Заряжай!
Твоє, да будет воля Твоя, яко на небе. А Боже.
Monsieur le Président, la Maison Blanche.
But, Mr. President, the United States and the White House claim they have evidence that Russia intervened in the conflict, sent its troops and supplied weapons. They claim they have proof. Do you believe that?
Proof? Why don't they show it? The entire world remembers the US Secretary of State demonstrating the evidence of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, waving around some test tube with washing powder in the UN Security Council. Eventually, the US troops invaded Iraq. Saddam Hussein was hanged, and it later turned out that there had never been any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. You know, it's one thing to say things, and another to actually have evidence. I will tell you again, no Russian troops.
Are you saying the US is lying?
There are no armed forces, no Russian instructors in southeastern Ukraine, and there never were any.
So you do not want to annex Ukraine, and you never tried to destabilize the situation there?
We never did that. The Ukrainian government must now sit down and talk with their own people instead of using weapons, tanks, planes and helicopters. They must start the negotiating process.
The new Ukrainian president was elected on the 25th of May through a democratic vote. Do you recognize Mr. Poroshenko as legitimate president?
I've already told you and will say it again. We will respect the choice of the Ukrainian people and we will cooperate with Ukrainian authorities.
La souveraineté de l'Ukraine.
Do you recognize Ukraine's sovereignty and its neutral stance with respect to relations between Russia and the West?
Yes, we recognize its sovereignty. Moreover, we'd like Ukraine to act as a sovereign state. Joining any military bloc or other rigid integration alliance amounts to a partial loss of sovereignty. But if a country opts for this and wants to cede part of its sovereignty, it's free to do so. Regarding Ukraine and military blocs, this is what worries us. Because if Ukraine joins, say, NATO, NATO's infrastructure will move directly towards the Russian border, which cannot leave us indifferent.
Monsieur le Président, vous avez...
Mr. President, Russian troops annexed Crimea recently. Will you ever give it back?
It's a delusion that Russian troops annexed Crimea. Russian troops did nothing of the kind. Frankly,
but Crimea has been included on the map of Russia, the kind of maps we used in school. It's part of Russia now. What was it, annexation or reunification? Which word should we use?
If you'll let me finish, I think you'll see what I mean. Russian troops were in Crimea under the international treaty on the deployment of the Russian military base. It's true that Russian troops helped Crimeans hold a referendum on their A, independence, and B, desire to join the Russian Federation. No one can prevent these people from exercising a right that is stipulated in Article 1 of the UN Charter, the right of nations to self-determination.
In other words, you will not return Crimea. Crimea is Russia. Is that it?
In accordance with the expression of the will of the people who live there, Crimea is part of the Russian Federation and its constituent entity.
And now you're seeing the president's automobile arriving at the parliament building, and Mr. Poroshenko will step on the red carpet. And even though there are so many people eager to see the ceremony, it was very easy to make our way to the parliament, and the access was facilitated greatly, unlike in previous times. Now you're seeing the fifth president of Ukraine. Petro Poroshenko, president of Ukraine, is making his first steps towards the historical point, taking the oath of allegiance to the nation of Ukraine. A very moving point. So the president is very calm, and the introduction of foreign guests is still underway in the parliament, and Mr. Poroshenko is ready to step into the hall of the parliament. Archbishop Mario of the Vatican. There are so many guests indeed, and the most surprising thing is that 1,000 times this path, 1,000 times Mr. Poroshenko has walked these halls and corridors. He was here in all capacities, a member of parliament, a member of the government, but these are very special steps he's making. And still, he's not free of anxiety, of course, because the huge burden of responsibility is now laying on his shoulders. And this is not only about the Ukrainian society that voted for him. This is the responsibility in the eyes of the international community, given all those expectations that the whole world is laying on him. You will remember his conversations in France with the world leaders, and it would be very fair to say that the global leadership community has a lot of expectations from President Poroshenko. And the way he rules the country, the way he leads the country, will affect the global evolution as well. The president will clearly have to face a lot of both internal and external challenges, but given his background political experience, I'm sure he will be able to bring the country to peace and quiet. And what is very important is that all actions of Mr. Poroshenko will be very clearly and closely monitored by the civil society. Please welcome the new President of Ukraine, Petro Alexeyevich Poroshenko. Today, President Poroshenko is receiving the symbols of his presidential power, of the flag being the first of them. Your Excellency, Mr. President, please allow me to present the ID of the President, the certificate of the President of Ukraine. The head of the Constitutional Court is invited to hand in the official symbols of the presidential power to Mr. Poroshenko. The sign of the President of Ukraine, the badge, rather. The coat of arms of the President of Ukraine and the seal, the Great Seal of the President of Ukraine. The President's mace. Dear friends, I have no doubts, nor anybody else would have them, that we'll be able to overcome all the difficulties. We'll secure the unity and freedom. We will not drown in the ocean of corruption and disorder. We are being supported by the whole world, and in 3 past days, I had a very convincing opportunity to get persuaded about it. The law, Ukraine has united around its key values. The people of Ukraine has said their fate word. Now, the ball is on our side. The government has to say its word. I'm stretching out my hand, trying to reach all those who voted for me and those who didn't. All those who will help instill order and peace in Ukraine. All those who believe in the European future of Ukraine. We're the people that were isolated and screened against Europe. We are turning back to Europe, and this path is irreversible, peaceful, and may we be blessed by the God. Glory to Ukraine. This inaugural speech can be all broken down into quotations. So it's indeed the star was eliminated from the dome of the parliament, not accidentally. Dear members of parliament, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the session of the Parliament of Ukraine on occasion of taking the oath of allegiance to the people of Ukraine is adjourned. Thank you.
вы действительно представьте, вы врете везде кругом.
Мы же никому не доверяем.
Я не вру вам. А вы сейчас за границу передадите, что здесь прекрасно, все лучше, чем... Еще, блядь, будете фотографировать у каждого, где, блядь, буярят нахуй. Я только, блядь, расстреляю. Понимаете, вы, блядь, пишите, показываете.
Прятались на площадке, как они не пострадали, загорелось, тушили.
There's been reports recently that 3 tanks have crossed the Russian border into Ukraine. I was wondering if you had any confirmation, and if proven true, would this be a step that warrants further sanctions?
I think I do have something on this. Unfortunately, I'm not sure I have it with me, so why don't we get that to you and anyone else who's interested after the briefing.
Well, can we stay in Ukraine for a second? And just, do you remember at all what it was? Is it a confirmation?
Again, I think it's probably sitting on my desk right now, and it came out right before the briefing,
right.
so we'll venture to get that out to all of you shortly after.
There were reports yesterday that the Ukrainian military is using white phosphorus bombs when attacking Slavyansk. Do you know anything about that? Did that come up in the conversation between Secretary Kerry and Foreign Minister Lavrov, if there was one last night?
There was one yesterday, and actually I did find what I wanted to say on the vehicle, so let me get to that after I get to Matt's question. So thank you for your patience. Okay, we've seen the media reports that 3 Russian tanks and other military vehicles may have crossed the border into eastern Ukraine in the border town of Snizhnia. We have long condemned the flow of Russian fighters and arms into Ukraine as destabilizing and a violation of Russia's Geneva commitments. If these latest reports are true, which I don't have confirmation of, this incursion marks a serious and disturbing escalation of the crisis in eastern Ukraine. As you know, there are a range of factors we look at as it relates to consequences. I don't have anything to outline on that front at this point in time. Your question, I'm sorry, was about
the phone
use of
call
phosphorus?
and about phosphorus.
The Secretary did speak with Foreign Minister Lavrov just yesterday afternoon. They discussed 2 issues, the ongoing situation on the ground in Ukraine. They did not talk about that specific issue. The Secretary encouraged Foreign Minister Lavrov to encourage President Putin to directly engage with President Poroshenko. We've seen reports that they had a phone call today. He also encouraged that conversation or engagement to focus on de-escalating the situation on the ground, and he called on Russia to halt the flow of militants and arms from Russia into eastern Ukraine, which is clearly relevant in this case. They also discussed Syria's chemical weapons program. The Secretary made clear that there's no excuse for failing to turn over the remaining 8% and asked for Foreign Minister Lavrov's assistance in putting additional pressure on the Syrian regime.
Even though it didn't come up in their conversation, do you have anything to say about the reports of the use of phosphorus? And there's some, what appears to be video and photographic evidence of the use of this.
by the Russian.
No, by the Ukrainians.
I have not seen those reports. I'm happy to check with our team and see if we have any confirmation of that or more to say on that.
А в этой можно как скорая провести? Сюда, сюда, настоящий. Вот, то скорая, то скорая. Есть скорая в колонне, сейчас будет попускать. Ее колонне. Один колонне. Пошел-ка. Бордюр. Еще. Две машины.
Вон, да, Алексей. Алексей, на, сними вот эту хуйню.
Снято. Дырка в потолке. Не, только увидел.
Кстати, посмотрю, у меня на втором этаже, блядь, потолок.
Сегодня какое число? 14 июня? Наш второй день рождения, дядя.
Да, ты прав, стопудово. Мое окошко, вот оно посередине, матрас поднятый, где спал. А он мой поднятый. Отвернись. 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 Чтоб лиц не снимал.
Пидорас. сука.
Нихуя себе у тебя угол выколупали. Так ты барахло сейчас свое ищешь, да?
Я ищу, блядь, документы, нахуй, изначально, блядь, барахло.
Так, уйди с моего места рождения. Место рождения нового.
Ля, иди сюда.
А там дырища в полу, да. Такая тебе, весоменькая, да?
А ну, отодвинь.
Это вот тут пацан лежал.
Где?
Ну тут же он спал.
Слава Україні! Україна! Понад усе! Україна! Понад усе! Героям слава!
Я готовий з вами тут стати і казати: Росія, забирайтеся з України.
Путін?
Путін, да.
Молодець.
Я готовий.
Безробіття, це падло приїжджає сюди на Лексусі, казати, який він піарщик.
Ні, ну я приїхав.
Ви зрадник! Вам тюрма треба!
Значить, я приїхав.
Вам потрібна тюрма, отак.
Over the weekend, there were a couple instances, well, two instances that I'm aware of. One with the involving the Ukrainian Prime Minister, who is someone who has had a great deal of interaction with the U.S., and also the Foreign Minister, who has also had a great deal of action with the U.S., making some rather interesting, to say the least, strident comments. The Prime Minister referred to Russians who are Russians who are supporting the separatists as subhuman. Is that something that you guys would agree with? Is it something that you're concerned about?
Well,
Is it the kind of language that you would expect from an ally of the United States? And the foreign minister called President Putin something that I can't even say here
Come
in
on,
the
Matt,
briefing.
you want to.
No, I'm not going to take the. I'll let you if you would like to.
No,
But maybe
thank
you would
you.
like
I
to
will
repeat it.
refrain
Maybe you
from
agree
that.
with it. I don't know.
I will refrain from that.
Is this the kind
let
of
me-
is
let
this
me-
the kind
let
of
me-
language coming from, you know, these are officials who you guys have supported, and I just want to know, I mean, is this kind of language acceptable?
Well, I think one piece here that's incredibly important is to remind you and everybody what the foreign minister was doing when he made those comments. And he was, when he went to the Russian embassy, he personally went to the Russian embassy in order to calm the protesters and succeeded in doing so. That was where he was. He's been encouraging calm, encouraging a peaceful resolution. And I would otherwise point you to the Ukrainians on the meaning of the language used. But I think the context here of what effort he was undergoing is an incredibly important part.
So you don't think that kind of language is inflammatory from the foreign minister's language? His comment, you don't think that's inflammatory at all?
Well, Matt, again, you're familiar with the words we use and don't use, but I think the context of what he was trying to accomplish there is important here.
All right, well, comments made in whatever, in that kind of context, when you're out, so you're trying to calm things down, if that's in fact what he was doing, which I don't have any reason to doubt, that's one thing. But the Prime Minister's reference to Russians as being subhuman was actually posted in English on the embassy website here. one of the complaints or one of the accusations that the Russians have made about these guys in Ukraine is that they are very right-wing, that they're fascist, that they're Nazi kind of thing. And, this kind of language just, it would appear to speak to it. Are you okay with them using words like subhuman to describe the Russians?
Matt, look, I think the Prime Minister's behavior and his leadership has been pretty consistently in support of a peaceful resolution to the circumstances on the ground, protections for individuals, including Russians, across eastern Ukraine. And I think I would encourage anyone to look at that as evidence of how he feels.
So you're not, you don't think that it warrants any kind of condemnation or any kind of, you don't think he should rethink and not use that kind of language? Because it is inflammatory.
I would point you to the Ukrainians for that, but again, I would remind everyone of the behavior and the support for a peaceful and calm resolution to the conflict.
Ага.
Мы мы когда мирно еще брали. Я думаю, где мы уже встретились? Ну, Славянск
Это вообще что, утро или я просто слышал, что наемник? Отходи подальше и снимай.
Хорошо, еще приплетем.
Руки опустите, мы вам верим. Вы идете как эти самые, да, как немцы постоянно. Роликом. Все, теперь звезда Ютуба.
На жаль, в сьогоднішні дні питання війни знов стало реальністю в Україні. Запах, сморід війни сьогодні в повітрі. І саме тому позавчора, під час перебування під Слов'янськом в зоні АТО, я прийняв рішення дати миру шанс.
Ті, хто не прийме умови припинення вогню, мають бути знищені. А у вас є досвід використання служби?
Тихо, тихо, пацаны! Блин, что вы делаете? Закрывай, закрывай еще! Давай, ребят, закрывай! Отход! А ну, отход, давай! Давай! Вперед, блядь! Прямой, ты замолу!
Да, ситуация там очень непростая. Пожалуйста, командующий Донецкой Народной Республики.
Спасибо, нормально.
last week and again this week, both you and Jen were very dismissive of these reports of thousands of people fleeing Ukraine into Russia.
I'm going to be again today, but let's talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, well, last Friday, in response to my question, which was, you have seen nothing like this, that there is no mass exodus or even close to thousands that are crossing the border from Ukraine into Russia, fleeing their homes, and Jen replied, correct. And then I asked again on Monday, and I said, it's still your understanding that reports in Russia of enormous amounts of refugee flows are incorrect, and you said incorrect, yes. Well, today, the UN Refugee Agency comes out in Geneva and says that 110,000 Ukrainians have fled this year for Russia, fled Ukraine to Russia, and that 54,000 have fled their homes in Ukraine but have stayed in Ukraine. I'm wondering, were you guys just completely misled by the Ukrainians and by
We don't think those numbers are credible.
You think that the
Right,
UN
so let's talk about
Refugee
this a little
Agency
bit.
is
Let's
wrong?
talk about this a little bit. Look, it is certainly likely and probable, right, that some thousands may have crossed the border. There's been quite a bit of border crossing both ways, we should note. So there's been people go back and forth quite frequently. This is as we've now seen, fairly porous border. So the notion that there may be, some thousands that have crossed is certainly probable. What we're saying is not credible is the notion that there's 90,000, hundreds of thousands that are fleeing from Ukraine to Russia. We just have seen no evidence to support that. We don't believe they're credible. We're watching, we're monitoring the situation, and obviously this is, this isn't a science, this is an art in some respects because you can't have people all along the border, but we just don't think that the hundreds of thousands number is credible. We don't have anything to corroborate it.
But it's not hundreds of thousands, it's
Or
110,000.
that 100,000, we just don't have anything to corroborate that or show that it's credible.
Okay, so you...
We don't have our own evidence.
Okay, fair enough, but then that's understandable, but this is the UN. This isn't the Russians saying this. This is the
Right.
United
I'm not
Nations.
saying there's
This is an agency that
anything-
you guys give millions and millions of dollars
Right.
to, and they're now no longer credible?
We don't have anything to back up that number, Matt.
Well, but you cite UNHCR and you cite the UN Human Rights Commission
do.
on plenty of things that you have don't have your own evidence to back up.
I don't think that's necessarily true.
Well,
When we use numbers from people outside agencies, I think we tend to back them up with our own analysis as well. But on this, we just don't have anything to corroborate,
you do, so that when they say something about North Korea, where you have absolutely no idea what's going on, you don't have anyone on the
I
ground.
would take issue with a little bit, have absolutely no idea what's going on.
Yeah, but there's no way that you can back up World Food Program statistics on hunger or malnutrition in North Korea on your own. You just take them and you accept them as credible
I think
because
you're
they
making
come
some
from the UN.
sweeping generalizations about
I'm
how we do
wondering why,
analysis.
is it something with the UN Refugee Agency
No.
that you don't believe?
No, again, we've seen numbers thrown around by a number of people, including the Russians. We don't have we don't think that those huge numbers are credible. We don't have information to back it up. So until we do, I'm not going to stand up here and make assumptions without having facts. So we'll keep looking at it. And again,
some would argue that you're doing that already.
well, I'm happy to have that argument with someone, whoever that someone might be. But my point is, look, as I said, I conceded the fact that there are numbers of people who do travel back and forth.
Yeah.
It's a very porous border. There are families that have contacts on both sides. So I can't rule out the possibility that even up to thousands of people have crossed one way or the other. But this notion that there's 100,000 Ukrainians who have fled en masse to Russia, we just don't believe is credible at this point. We're looking into it. I'm not ruling it out entirely for eternity that we ever could get to that assessment, but we just don't have anything to back it up.
Okay, but is there anything else? Can I ask? Do you have doubts about the UN High Commissioner for Refugees on other?
We don't.
In other
Look, this is a
situations? This is the
credible
only one.
organization, right? It's a credible organization, and we're looking into these reports and seeing if we can
Okay.
confirm them.
It's a credible organization with incredible figures.
We just can't confirm their data on this one issue, Matt. I think you can understand that.
Офигеть.
Кобылы из двойной разнесло полностью. Анин тоже стекла вылетело. В общем, усы Дина.
Пострадавших нет? Не знаю.
Вон там кровь, заснимите там.
Мужчину, да?
Да.
А как она сюда попала? Что, я не
Да
помню.
вот тоже крыша целая, главное. Это как надо залететь.
Что, залетела в форточку? В щель вот эту?
Можно было лететь. А где же это? Кто-то ж пострадал.
Это мужчина, его скорая забрала. Фух.
Фотографируйте, все расскажите. 24. 24 Россия. Торговали все на базаре.
Вы фотокорреспондент какой?
Местный.
Нашей славянской
Да,
телевидении.
да, да.
Фотографируйте все. Ребята, вот, посмотрите, руки в крови. Вот это вот, посмотрите. А ну иди сюда, фотокорреспондент, иди сюда. Мы затянули его в ручнику только.
Что там?
О, убила кого-то. Лужа крови.
Молодой
вот,
парень, нет?
лужа крови. Почку разорвала, только скорая приехала. Посмотри. Затянули его в магазин, бруснику. Я не жалуюсь. Я обыкновенно говорю, все руки в крови. Мы его еле перевязали, чтобы почка у него не удалилась. Разорвала ему почку.
Слушайте, а вот
посмотри.
сегодня в Ампине было с молоком. Я приходила, человека не было.
Посмотри. Нет, ты не веришь?
Да я чему я не верю?
Посмотри. Посмотри, что сделали. Посмотри, руки в крови. Мне не стыдно, как мы его спасали. То, что я вот это вот с себя сняла, вот это вот, и все. Лужа крови, лужа. Ребята, почку разорвала. Только что приехала ополчение, приехали, скорой забрали. Что это такое? Ну, конечно, не попало, почку разорвала.
Куда они стреляли?
Федя где? Федя!
Оля сейчас сюда будет ехать, ну что ты уезжаешь?
Камеру держать не могу.
Сейчас я подойду.
Молодец. Взгляд не отводи. Сейчас будет хорошо все. Сейчас будет хорошо все. Глядя на меня, смотри. Глаза не опускай. Глаза не опускай. Давай, дядя. Нет, на меня смотри.
Подожди, не дергай, не дергай.
Давай, ребят, вытаскивай.
Вытаскивай.
Да хуй с ней,
Автобус быстрее толкайте! Клепис! Клепис!
Аккуратно, садись.
Автобус толкайте!
Куда его?
Толкайте автобус, а то он поедет.
Слушай, давай все, я не пойду.
Подожди, сейчас я что-то.
Журналист и солдатские матери из ПВО части. Держи на.